All right. I have a bunch of stories to read, honestly, and most of them are really long. And not necessarily opposed to it, but I'm going to need more time. So today, I'm going to be picking back up with a small section of the history of the moral feelings. It's from Human All Too Human, that was written by Friedrich Nietzsche, in case you didn't know. I'm picking up on part 77. Honor transferred from person to things. Actions prompted by love or by the spirit of self sacrifice for others are universally honored wherever they're manifest. Hence, is magnified the value set upon whatever things may be loved, or whatever things conduce to self sacrifice, although, in themselves, they may be worth nothing much. A valiant army is evident of the value of the thing it fights for. 78. Ambition, a substitute for moral feeling. Moral feeling should never become extinct in natures that are destitute of ambition. The ambitious can get along without moral feeling just as well as with it. Hence, the sons of retired, ambitionless families generally become, by a series of rapid gradations, when they lose moral feeling. Weird. The most absolute lunkheads. 79. Vanity enriches. How poor the human mind would be without vanity. As it is, it resembles a well-stacked and ever-renewed ware emporium that attracts buyers of every class. They can find almost everything, have almost everything, provided they bring with them the right kind of money. Admiration. 80. Senility and death. Apart from the demands made by religion, it may well be asked why it is more honorable in an aged man who feels the decline of his powers to await slow extinction than to fix a term to his existence himself. Okay, Steppenwolf, suicide in such a case is a quite natural and due proceeding that ought to command respect as a triumph of reason, and did in fact command respect during the times of the masters of Greek philosophy and the bravest Roman patriots, who usually died by their own hands. Eagerness, on the other hand, to keep alive from day to day with the anxious counsel of physicians, without capacity to attain any nearer to one's ideal of life, is far less worthy of respect. Religions are very rich in refuges from the mandate of suicide. Hence, they ingratiate themselves with those who cling to life. With that being said, please cling to life. We want you around. Or I do. 81. Delusions regarding victim and regarding evildoer. When the rich man takes a possession away from the poor man, for example, a prince who deprives a plebeian of his beloved, there arises in the mind of the poor man a delusion. He thinks the rich man must be wholly perverted to take from him the little that he has. But the rich man appreciates the value of a single possession much less because he is accustomed to many possessions, so that he cannot put himself in the place of the poor man and does not act by any means as ill as the latter supposes. Both have a totally false idea of each other. The iniquities of the mighty, which bulk most largely in history, are not merely so monstrous as they seem. The hereditary consciousness of being a superior being with superior environments renders one very callous and lulls the conscience to rest. We all feel when the difference between ourselves and some other being is exceedingly great, that no element of injustice can be involved. And we kill a fly with no qualms of conscience whatever. So, too, it is no indication of wickedness in Xerxes, whom even the Greeks represented as exceptionally noble, that he deprived a father of his son and had him drawn and quartered because the latter had manifested a troublesome, ominous distrust of an entire expedition. The individual was in this case brushed aside as a pestiferous insect. He was too low and mean to justify continued sentiments of compunction in the ruler of the world. Indeed, no cruel man is ever as cruel in the main as his victim thinks. The idea of pain is never the same as the sensation. The rule is precisely analogous in the case of the unjust judge and of the journalist who, by means of devious rhetorical methods, leads public opinion astray. Cause and effect are, in all these instances, entwined with totally different series of feeling and thoughts, whereas it is unconsciously assumed that principal and victim feel and think exactly alike. And because of this assumption, the guilt of the one is based upon the pain of the other. 82. The soul's skin, as the bones, flesh, entrails, and blood vessels are enclosed by a skin that renders the aspect of men endurable, so the impulses and passions of the soul are enclosed by vanity. It is the skin of the soul. 83. Sleep of virtue. If virtue goes to sleep, it will be more vigorous when it awakes. I don't know about all that. 84. Subtlety of shame. Men are not ashamed of obscene thoughts, but they are ashamed when they suspect that obscene thoughts are attributed to them. 85. Naughtiness is rare. Most people are too much absorbed in themselves to be bad. Okay, now you're just insane. 86. The might in the balance. We are praised or blamed as the one or the other may be expedient for displaying to advantage our power of discernment. 87. Luke 18:14. Improved. He that humbleth himself wisheth to be exalted. 88. Prevention of suicide. There is a justice according to which we may deprive a man of life, but none that permits us to deprive him of death. This is merely cruelty. 89. Vanity. We set store by the good opinion of men, first, because it is of use to us, and next, because we wish to give them pleasure. Children, their parents, pupils, their teachers, and well disposed persons, all others generally. Only when the good opinion of men is important to somebody, apart from personal advantage, or the desire to give pleasure, do we speak of vanity. In this last case, a man wants to give himself pleasure, but at the expense of his fellow creatures, inasmuch as he inspires them with a false opinion of himself, or else inspires good opinion in such a way that it is a source of pain to others by arousing envy. The individual generally seeks, through the opinion of others, to attain, oh, to attest and fortify the opinion he has of himself. But the potent influence of authority, an influence as old as man himself, leads many also to strengthen their own opinion of themselves by means of authority, that is, to borrow from others the expedient of relying more upon the judgment of their fellow men than upon their own interests in oneself. The wish to please oneself attains, with the vain man, such proportions that he first misleads others into a false, unduly exalted estimate of himself, and then relies upon the authority of others for his self estimate. He thus creates the delusion that he pins his faith to. It must, however, be admitted that the vain man does not desire to please others so much as himself, and he will often go so far, on this account, as to overlook his own interests. For he often inspires his fellow creatures with malicious envy, and renders them ill disposed, in order that he may thus increase his own delights in himself. 90. Limits of the love of mankind. Every man who has declared that some other man is an ass or a scoundrel gets angry when the other man conclusively shows that the assertion was erroneous. 91. Weeping morality. How much delight morality occasions. Think of the ocean of pleasing tears that has flowed from the narration of noble, great-hearted deeds. This charm of life would disappear if the belief in complete irresponsibility gained the upper hand. 92. Origin of justice. Justice, reasonableness, has its origin among approximate equals in power, as Thucydides in the dreadful conference of the Athenian and Melian envoys has rightly conceived. Thus, where there exists no demonstrable supremacy, and a struggle leads but to mutual, useless damage, the reflection arises that an understanding would best be arrived at and some compromise entered into. The reciprocal nature is hence the first nature of justice. Each party makes the other content, inasmuch as each receives what it prizes more highly than the other. Each surrenders to the other what the other wants, and receives in return his own desire. Justice is therefore reprisal and exchange upon the basis of an approximate equality of power. Thus, revenge pertains originally to the domain of justice, as its is a sort of reciprocity, equally so gratitude. Justice reverts naturally to the standpoint of self preservation, therefore, to the egoism of this consideration. Why should I injure myself to no purpose, and perhaps never attain my end? So much for the origin of justice, only because men, through mental habits, have forgotten the original motive of so called just and rational acts, and also because for thousands of years children have been brought to admire and imitate such acts. Have they gradually assumed the appearance of being unegotistical? Upon this appearance is founded the high estimates of them, which, moreover, like all estimates, is continually developing. For whatever is highly esteemed is striven for, imitated, made the object of self sacrifice, while the merit of the pain and emulation thus expended is, by each individual, ascribed to the thing esteemed. How slightly moral would the world appear without forgetfulness? A poet could say that God has posted forgetfulness as a sentinel at the portal of the temple of human merit. Concerning the law of the weaker, whenever any party, for instance, a besieged city, yields to a stronger party, under stipulated conditions, the counter stipulation is that there is a reduction to insignificance, a burning and destruction of the city, and thus a great damage inflicted upon the stronger party. Thus arises a sort of equalization principle, upon the basis of which a law can be established. The enemy has an advantage to gain by its maintenance. To this extent, there is also a law between slaves and masters, limited only by the extent to which the slave may be useful to his master. The law goes originally only so far as the one party may appear to the other potent, invincible, stable, and the like. To such an extent, then, the weaker has rights, but very limited ones. Hence the famous dictum that each has as much law on his side as his power extends, or more accurately, as his power is believed to extend. 94. The three phases of morality hit there too. It is the first evidence that the animal has become human when his conduct ceases to be based upon the immediately expedient, but upon the permanently useful, when he has therefore grown utilitarian, capable of purpose. Thus is manifested the first rule of reason. A still higher stage is attained when he regulates his conduct upon the basis of honor, by means of which he gains mastery of himself and surrenders his desires to principles. This lifts him far above the phase in which he was actuated only by considerations of personal advantage as he understood it. He respects and wishes to be respected. This means that he comprehends utility as a thing dependent upon what his opinion of others is, and their opinion of him. Finally, he regulates his conduct. The highest phase of morality hitherto attained, and by his own standard of men and things, he himself decides for himself and for others what is honorable and what is useful. He has become a lawgiver to opinion upon the basis of his ever higher developing conception of the utilitarian and the honor. Knowledge makes him capable of placing the highest utility, that is, the universal, enduring utility, before merely personal utility, of placing ennobling recognition of the enduring and universal before the merely temporary. He lives and acts as a collective individuality. 95. Ethic of the developed individual. Hitherto, the altruistic has been looked upon as the distinctive characteristic of moral conduct, and it is manifest that it was the consideration of universal utility that prompted praise and recognition of altruistic conduct. Must not a radical departure from this point of view be imminent, now that it is being ever more clearly perceived that in the most personal considerations, the most general welfare is attained, so that conduct inspired by the most personal considerations of advantage is just the sort which has its origin in the present conception of morality as a universal utilitarianism. To contemplate oneself as a complete personality and bear the welfare of that personality in mind in all that one does. This is productive of better results than any sympathetic susceptibility and conduct in behalf of others. Indeed, we all suffer from such disparagement of our own personalities, which are at present made to deteriorate from neglect. Capacity is, in fact, divorced from our personality in most cases, and sacrificed to the state, to science, to the needy, as if it were the bad which deserved to be made a sacrifice. Now, we are willing to labor for our fellow men, but only to the extent that we find our own highest advantage in doing so. No more, no less. The whole matter depends upon what may be understood as one's advantage. The crude, undeveloped, rough individuality will be the very ones to estimate it most inadequately. 96. Usage and ethic. To be moral, virtuous, praiseworthy, means to yield obedience to ancient law and hereditary usage. Whether this obedience be rendered readily or with difficulty is long immaterial. Enough that it be rendered good, finally, comes to mean him who acts in the traditional manner as a result of hereditary or natural disposition. That is to say, does what is customary with scarcely an effort, whatever that may be. For example, revenges injuries when revenge, as with the ancient Greeks, was part of good morals. He is called good because he is good to some purpose, and as benevolence, sympathy, considerateness, moderation, and the like come. In the general course of conduct, to be finally recognized as good to some purpose, as utilitarian, the benevolent man, the helpful man, is duly styled good. At first, others, and more important kinds of utilitarian qualities stand in the foreground. Bad is not habitual, unusual to do things not in accordance with usage, to oppose the traditional, however rational or reverse the traditional may be, to do injury to one's social group or community and to one's neighbor as thus understood, is looked upon through all the variations of moral laws in different ages as the peculiarly immoral act, so that today we associate the word bad with deliberate injury to one's neighbor or community, egoistic as non egoistic, do not constitute the fundamental opposites that have brought mankind to make a distinction between moral and immoral, good and bad. But adherence to traditional customs and emancipation from it. How the traditional has its origin is quite immaterial. In any event, it had no reference to good and bad, or any categorical imperativeness, but to the all important end of maintaining and sustaining the community, the race, the consideration, the nation. Every superstitious custom that originated in a misinterpreted event or casualty entails some tradition, to adhere to which is moral. To break loose from it is dangerous, more prejudicial to the community than to the individual, because diversity visits the consequences of impiety and sacrilege upon the community rather than upon the individual. Now every tradition grows ever more venerable, the more remote is its origin, the more confused that origin is, The reverence due to it increases from generation to generation. The tradition finally becomes holy and inspires awe. Thus, it is that the precept of piety is a far loftier morality than that incalculated by altruistic conduct. Sorry, I abruptly cut that because I started getting mixed up and I was like, nope, we're done for today. Thanks for watching DJX Chronicles. Please like and subscribe, and I would really appreciate it. See you next.